as the various speakers have outlined, that Ghana is embarking on a remarkable digital transformation journey with huge investments in digital infrastructure, including payments, digitization of government services, regulation, and so forth. The scope of the transformation efforts is indeed very wide, and the potential to greatly disrupt, and it has the potential to greatly disrupt business as usual in many sectors and spheres of society. It's very clear that the transformation hill can be an arduous climb, and we can only succeed if all stakeholders play their role and if they collaborate effectively. And when I introduce the panelists, you'll see why, because they come from almost all spheres of the economy. There's a need for all stakeholders in private and public sector and indeed the public, general public, to join hands, co-create, collaborate, to ensure that the digital transformation is inclusive and touches everyone. So, because the efforts are deep and we are basically doubling down, there are critical questions that come up. Number one, do we have our priorities right? Are all the necessary sectors attuned and engaged? Are the right stakeholders at the table? Are those engaged following the plan? Which plan? Who owns the plan, and where does it live? Is it sufficient to leave the transformation agenda to market forces, or should we intentionally coordinate the efforts of relevant stakeholders in the private and public sector? How do we energize co-creation and action among relevant stakeholders? How do we measure success? What indicators are we tracking? What benchmarks do we follow? What have we learned from other countries? Germany, Israel, Rwanda, and so forth. To help us dive into these issues, we have our wonderful panelists. Because our time is very short, I am going to introduce them. Because great people, they just can't help it. So I'm going to start with Professor Fred McBagonluri. He's the president and provost of Academic City University College. Professor Fred is a Ghanaian-American inventor, and I would add novelist. You should look up his name and read his books. Before this position, he was the founding dean of Ashesi University, so he was my dean as well. And prior to that, he's had many years of experience in product development, for instance, at Jones Healthcare in Arlington, Texas. He was the director of research at and development and director of IT at Siemens Medical, and also at Becton Dickinson, the world's largest manufacturer of injection systems. And through all of this, he co-invented 22 US patents and several numerous technical publications. It's very much in order. I haven't met another Ghanaian with more than 22 patents, so hats off to you, sir. Very quickly, once upon a time, he nearly made it as an astronaut. He probably would tell us about that. The next is Dr. Collins Yeboah Afari, Director General of the Advanced Information Technology Kofi Annan Center for Excellence. He's also the chairman of Big Pay Ghana Limited. He's had many years of experience, including recently as the Director of IT at the Electoral Commission of Ghana, which successfully, we would say, delivered the 2020 presidential and parliamentary elections. He's worked on many IT projects worldwide, including for clients such as the Maryland Department of Transportation, the United States Mint Department of Treasury in Washington, and also for the Vanguard Group in the US. Welcome, Dr. Collins Yeboah Afari. Next is Mr. Samuel Amanor, founder and CEO of BLUESPACE Africa Technologies, a financial technology integration company. He's also had many years of experience in the leveraging technology game, I would say. He cut his teeth working at Oracle, worked through with a number of companies, including EMC and Dell, leading their business development in emerging markets, particularly in Ghana. And he has a lot of passion for helping companies start new businesses and also helping startups. So he represents our private sector space, so to speak. Next, who's going to be on the line is Dr. Harald Egner. He's a chief engineer at the Manufacturing Technology Center in the UK, which develops, improves, and operates the most advanced, innovative manufacturing processes and technologies in the world. He's responsible for international research partnerships, networks, and ecosystems. He's the co-organizer of the annual International Digitalizing Manufacturing Conference at the MTC, and prior to that, he worked for 23 years as the Strategy and European Relations Officer, also at Fraunhofer Institute of Manufacturing and Engineering. Last but not the least is Johanna Hartung, the Component Manager at the Digital Transformation Center of GIZ. He is also the project lead for digital transformation at GIZ Ghana, where he leads a team in 6 regions of Ghana working on digital services in rural areas, digital skills, digital entrepreneurship, e-commerce, and artificial intelligence. Prior to that, he was advisor of digital transformation at GIZ from 2018 to 2020, and played similar roles for many years in Germany. Welcome, gentlemen and lady. I know that was a mouthful, but I needed to do that to save time. Okay, so here we are. We're going to start with one question for all the panelists, and then we're going to get specific and customized. And then after that, we're going to take questions. So if we can prepare the mic for questions somewhere, I don't know where, in the audience. I want to start with you, Professor Fred. What are the priorities for digital transformation agenda for academia, given that we can say you represent many things, but let's say you represent academia this morning. And what are the prospects for education?
Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Adomdza, for the kind introduction of myself and my fellow panelists here. And what a beautiful week it has been. I mean, just amazing. In addition to the beautiful music we just heard, I'm really, really excited to be part of this event and to see digital transformation beginning to take a central role in our developmental conversation. So what is the perspective of academia? Now, WASI results will come out soon. Professional results are out. We have over 400,000 students, potentially tertiary students, that will be coming into the university system. So everything the Vice President spoke about today, the technology park, the need to drive digital innovation, will have to be manned by these future graduates and those that are already in the system. And so academia has to be prepared to transform itself. Academia is usually the last place to move. You actually think academia should be at the forefront of driving technology development, but there is resistance. If you look at many of our technical universities today, people are still being taught technical drawing and engineering drawing. And the argument has always been, for you to be a good engineer, you have to go to the pencil and the paper. And the question I always ask is, if you want to be a medical doctor, do you have to go to the 18th century where they used to tie people down and chop their leg off with swords? So why do we always have to go back and learn from fundamentals? If you use digital media, you'll be able to co-create solutions with people sitting all around the world. So why use a pencil and a paper? So that's one area that tertiary education ought to change. Now, we were all hit with the pandemic, and this is just a sign of things to come. And I can tell you, we were not really ready. Universities like us went online within a week. Many others couldn't transform sooner. So how do we position our educational system so that it can respond in a very timely fashion to such shocks that are inherently coming? Many more of such will be coming. And for those of us in higher ed, in the last 4 or 5 years that I've been in higher education, we were told you couldn't hire people to teach in the universities with degrees that were earned online. And there has never really been any coherent, prudent rationale for that. The assumption has always been that to have a good quality degree, you need to sit in the 4 corners of a classroom. Where that comes from, nobody knows, because Harvard Extension has been teaching online courses for more than 10 years. And you will actually think that in the developing world that we live in, where access, infrastructure, among other things, are so limited, we should be at the forefront of the digital revolution. So you look at East Africa and you have M-Pesa has been around for several years, and it rose because people could not move resources around. And so you would think that transforming into digital education, offering digital education, should actually be a priority in the developing world where we don't have the classrooms, we don't have the necessary infrastructure to drive education, but we've been resistant. And so this ought to change. Fundamentally, you know, when I work for the Siemens and the Becton and Dickinsons, when we hire people, we are looking for, one, skills. Do you have the skills to get the job done? We were never hiring saying, which university did you go to? We were hiring based on, can you work with other people? Your spirit to play in a team. Now, if you are as intelligent as Einstein and you can't work with other people, I don't want to hire you. Because knowledge is so vast that it cannot reside in one person's head. So you need the skills to work with other people. So skills, one, but team spirit is equally important. So I think the priority, essentially, in higher ed is to have the courage to transform into the digital world, to find ways to access the same capabilities that we were previously accessing within the classrooms. We need to understand that we can't send the kids back to the 18th century to learn things about building bridges when we have computers and software systems that can do that. And we need to have the courage as faculty to learn new things. You know, some of this resistance is because of our own inability or lack of initiative to learn new things. And the world of innovation is going so fast that, you know, I remember my days at Ashesi where the president would say, if you are not a student yourself, you shouldn't be here. We should all be learners. We should all be open to new things, new ideas, and understand that the world we live in is so dynamic that you can't be caught in a snapshot of time. So I think faculty has to go and be humble enough to learn new things and to integrate those new ideas in the classroom.
Right. Thank you so much, Prof. Digital education should be a priority in the developing world. It's wonderful. And we shouldn't send the kids back. The teachers have to be, learners as well have the courage to embrace digitalization. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, let's go to Samuel Amanor. Let's say you represent the private sector.
The private sector.
Yes. So same question. What are the priorities for digital transformation agenda for the private sector? What are the prospects?
Thank you, Dr. Gordon, and thank you to the organizers of this event. I think it's a very forward-looking initiative, and I hope that it becomes an actionable sort of event where it won't just be a talk show, it won't just be a meet and greet and go home. So that's my hope for this event. But the private sector has different motives. They're driven by profit and loss. It's a capitalistic ecosystem, so time is money in the private sector. And as you know, digital transformation aims to foster a closer connect to customers, and it also aims to reduce the time in service delivery, whatever it is, right? So given these two initiatives, the private sector is actually undergoing tremendous transformation. If you look at the financial sector in particular, which is the sector that I'm focused on, we're looking at how to digitize financial activity, both for the service providers in terms of the operators, the banks, the insurance companies, the pension providers, as well as central banks across the continent. So anywhere there is financial services, we are there. And because their environment is heavily regulated, everything has to be auditable, everything has to be traceable, everything has to be particularly risk monitored when it comes to lending, for example. So the private sector within financial services is quite well positioned because it's the center for the economic structure, right? Because everything that happens, everything that is moving, whether you're selling coconut on the street, at some point you engage with a service provider who is in the financial service. If you're importing goods, you would engage the financial service industry. If you're a school like Ashesi or the academic city, you will still engage the financial service provider. So they are in the center of everything that's happening. And the frustration is that the financial service providers are trying as much as possible to digitize. Obviously, the corporates that they are serving, the institutions that they are serving, on the other hand, may not be as fully digitized as they are. So there's a little bit of a break in terms of consistency of service. You guys have seen environments where, you fill forms, even coming in here, you fill a form, you register online, you get to the desk and say, okay, write your name down again, right? So there's a complete disconnect in service delivery where there are interruptions in the customer experience, right? And this is happening across the entire ecosystem in the private sector. What this means is people are wasting time, number one. If time is money, you are definitely wasting time, right? And if you add, it may not be significant if you're looking at only 5 people. When you're looking at about 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, the impact and the scale of the issue becomes quite big. For example, you want to register for your passport or your Ghana card or what have you in the private sector, you also have to deal with a government entity, right? Even though private sector is engaging, private sector is now dealing with another ecosystem, which is the government ecosystem. So what happens is, if the private sector is digitized, but the moment they leave that network, they go to a government ecosystem. If that government ecosystem is also not digitized, you have a break in customer experience. You also have a break in the service delivery. So digitization affects everybody. You cannot basically operate in silos, right? You can't say, oh, the Ghana government is heavily digitized. The question is, if you begin to measure which part of the Ghana government is digitized, you begin to see that there are breaks, there are interruptions, there are time inefficient systems that needs to be, obviously improved. The private sector is trying. If you look at agriculture, if you look at energy sector, if you look at water and sanitation, all these ecosystems require engagement with people. They require the handling of money. They require the authentication of identity. They require the storage of information. They require so many other things that are consistent across. The challenge is digital transformation can only be realized if you have a lot of doers, actors, and education around to inform all the participants who want to be digitized. There is a huge shortage of talent in Ghana, right? Because if you have the ambition to digitize, I think the Kigali innovation lady, Tessie, talked about the fact that procurement is the single interruption to speeding up the digital transformation agenda. If you look at the time it takes from issue an RFP to the time of fulfillment in the private sector, today it takes an average of about 6 to 9 months. Right? The issuing of the RFP, the selection of the vendors, the award letter, the procurement of the assets that you want to acquire, the implementation of those assets, then the training of the staff who wants to use the service. By the time you actually see value, your money has depreciated at least by 30% of that asset that you've acquired. Right? So the barriers are plenty, but I would say the biggest hurdle has to do with education. Right? And also restructuring the private sector's ecosystem. They have to have a place to go to. Today, they float the RFPs in the public. There's no central focal point for banks to go to when they're looking for excellence in financial service transformation. There are no centers of excellence, right? So basically, if you're a part of an association, you call your friend who is in a bank. If you're part of an ecosystem where you have an association, you call them and say, hey, what did you do when it came to cybersecurity? What did you do when it came to document digitization? What did you do when it came to ID? What did you do when it came to fraud management or financial service inclusion into your business? So I think there has to be centers of excellence, which will provide the consistent thought leadership around how the private sector should digitize. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That's great. So education and consistency across different sectors, and people educated to embrace the movement, if you will. All right. Thank you for that. We'll go to Dr. Yeboah Afari. So as the Director General for the Kofi Annan Center, which is under MOCD, will say that you represent the public sector, let's put it that way. So what will be the priorities for digital transformation from, let's say, an ICT-focused government agency perspective?
All right. Thank you, Gordon, and thank you all for making time to come be with us here today, and actually for this week. So, and I just heard my partner here talking about the private sector missing the center of excellence, right? So where I come from, or my department, we are the center of excellence for the government. So I'm just giving my department, my agency a props here. Right. So the government's agenda focuses on a few things that are listed here that I think the agenda should follow, the transformation agenda should follow. The first of it is to promote innovation, right? I mean, the government would like to create an ecosystem where it's easier for everyone who has the ability to be able to innovate. In that doing, you increase operational efficiency, that's ease of doing business. So if you are government, you know, your first and the only poly mandate is to provide goods and services for the citizens like you and I. So we also, along the way, improve revenue growth, create employment, and the last but not the least, reduce the cost of doing business in this country. So that agenda that the Vice President, you heard him speak about, that the Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister for MOCD also spoke about, is that, right? That is the nutshell of it. Now, we have a few of, actually most of our agencies that are now trying to join into this journey, trying to get their digital ecosystem in their own place done so that we can join into this idea, the vision that the Vice President has, which my department and the Ministry of Communication and Digitalization is implementing this agenda. You know, when you go around and talk to them, what you hear is that most of them, they lack the support, the technical support to help them identify the areas where they can digitize, right? They don't have the skills, enough skills or adequate skills. They lack online platform to do collaboration and co-creation and all that. And some are now just begun to discuss or even talk about the cost-benefits analysis, of which, you know, we're all trying to help these agencies in doing that. But now, the problem is, you know, we still have agencies who are, or which are just now doing work in silos, trying to develop their own kind of digitalization agenda that may not necessarily be what the Vice President's vision is. There is a policy document that's being developed that is in the draft stage now that our minister is working on with the consultants that will soon be subjected to stakeholder consultations. And that policy document seeks to provide a framework to lead us all on the public agencies to determine how ready we are, how digital service assessment is going to be done, and actually review what existing digital services we have, and then see how we prioritize these services, and then which agency even gets the priority over the other in terms of onboarding and all that. So there's a framework coming that will help us do that, but unfortunately it's not done yet. It's in the draft stages that when my minister comes back, we'll subject it to stakeholder consultations and get some proper direction in this journey. So that's where we are now, and thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. I think the speaker from Rwanda also mentioned that, right? The need for that policy framework that the different stakeholders will be sort of plugged into to realize or execute the digitization agenda. So it's good to hear you say that. And it was good for you to share your comments right after Samuel's, because, you know, he was identifying the things that were missing, and you're saying, well, we have some of them, but we have a long way to go. That's good. So let's go to Ms. Johanna. Development agencies support governments and also focus on making sure that, you know, that the policies and programs are quite widespread, I would say. Let's put it that way. What are the priorities for digital transformation agenda for development agencies like GIZ, also given that you are a key component of this program?
Thank you, Gordon. First of all, I also wanted to mention that I'm not Harald.
No, you're not. I didn't say
Harald, because you introduced him right after him. So
Right.
Harald is online.
Yes.
And my name is Johanna.
Yes.
And I'm very excited about being here today. Finally, we have reached this day, and we have prepared for long for this day. And I'm also very excited to be on a panel, which is truly multi-stakeholder in the full spirit of the Ghana Digital Innovation Week, and also what His Excellency, our Vice President, has said about collaboration in the ecosystem. So very happy about that. As a development partner, we would not dare to speak about kind of our priorities. And so I would rather kind of tap into a document that representatives from the African Union, as we have spoken a lot about Pan-Africanism today, from the African Union and the European Union discussed about, and from Ghana, Honorable Minister Ursula Owusu-Ekufo was also representing the African Union in this case, and they discussed about 4 main goals, which I think I would quickly touch upon, which is universal access to affordable broadband. I think we have heard about this base that is necessary for any digitalization efforts we are talking about. Essential skills for all to enable citizens to thrive. I think education has already been mentioned by Professor McBagonluri. And then, we have also spoken about improving the business environment, facilitating access to finance and business development services to boost digitally enabled entrepreneurship, but then also to transform the more kind of traditional sectors of the economy and to accelerate the adoption of e-services. So these are the 4 goals that this distinguished task force has come up with, and that kind of captures it already very well. But then when it comes to kind of the principle behind that I wanted to quickly touch upon is the putting humans in the center of these goals and the digital transformation agenda. And for us, that means making sure that the digital transformation is broadly and inclusive and sustainable. And so as a development partner, what we might kind of also make sure is that we represent people on such panels here that are not here, that are the ones that digitalization has also not yet reached out to. That is people in the rural areas, many women and girls. We have the statistics that are left behind. So putting humans in the center and making sure that no one is left behind is what I would call as a priority. And then speaking about priorities before I end here is also about having the priorities, and then we discussed about execution. So in lines of execution, it's about creating coordinating structures, and we have discussed about this or heard about this today at the national level, but then also at the regional and continental level, GDIW being kind of one first start into the conversation, but then there are also is also the need for kind of specific platforms for specific goals. For example, for business-ready ideas and innovations, including disruptive technologies, to have research institutions, universities, private sector come together. And I think the Center of Excellence is something that has also been mentioned before for different areas, for stakeholders to come together and specialize. Because I think what is also necessary is that whilst we are talking about synergies of the many initiatives, it's also about kind of specialization in the ecosystem and having stakeholders work together to make specific progress in specific areas where Ghana already has a competitive advantage.
All right. Well, that sounds great. I was going to ask you how far we've come on the list that you just provided, but I'll come back to you on that. So last but not the least, we hopefully, in the spirit of digital transformation, we'll hear from Harald Egner from the UK. So let's see if we can have him online. Oh, there you are. Welcome, Harald.
Welcome. I hope you.
Wonderful. So from let's say from an outsider's perspective, what priorities should, for digital transformation, what priorities should Ghana be focused on, or what priorities must Ghana have to effectively execute a digital transformation agenda?
Well, I have the great benefit not only been living in 2 different countries, but in different ecosystems, innovation ecosystems as well. But thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this, because being part of something like this is a completely new dimension for me as well. And however, when you actually approach this question of how to approach digital transformation, I think there's simply 3 key things you need to try to differentiate. It's a complex issue, this transformation. But I think what you always should try to do to differentiate between the why, the what, and the how. So starting with why is it actually what you're doing? And I think first of all, keep in mind, digital as such is not the purpose itself. Digital is a massive and a very powerful enabler, but it only can enable what you want to do and what you want to achieve. So you have to be very clear about what is it actually, well, or why you're actually doing all this. And you need to understand who are your customers and what are the needs of these customers. And I think there is a very wide range of customers. And if you can bring them all together, you can achieve a lot. So that's not only in industry, there's infrastructure, there's economy as a whole. There's all the things that about the state administration we heard before as well. So it's understanding all that and actually why you're going to do that. And then the why should help you. When you understand the why, you should be able to define some outcomes. And that is actually the measure if you make progress or not. And be careful. I'm personally not a big fan of KPIs, particularly when it comes to education systems. There's some very bad examples in the UK, for example. What is easy to measure is not usually the right thing to measure. It's easy to, like you, the example before, okay, the number of patents or something is easy to measure, but I think you have to be careful throwing too many KPIs out that you actually, in the end, you get what you measure and not necessarily maybe what you wanted. On the what is it you're going to do? And I think there is things been mentioned before, and maybe just briefly summarize again. The point is for digital transformation, digital itself is about connectivity, but the digital transformation is about connectivity as well, but not only in the technical sense of interoperability and so on. It's actually how can you connect things, how can you align things, how can you bring things together across sectors, across different industry sectors, and how can you focus, connect in one way, but focus on the other side as well. Centers of excellence have been mentioned, and they basically are a big opportunity, but you have to be careful that these centers sometimes turn into silos because excellence always means a competition. I think that the big thing is to how can you create these centers, but still make sure they're actually connected and they basically are part of a network, and the network is visible to the end users, to the customers, so they know, as it was mentioned before, where they actually need to go. And on the how do you actually make things happen? It's been mentioned before, but I can only re-emphasize what Johanna just said before. We run our digital manufacturing event since 2015, and it almost always, and it did again last week, ended up with the key thing are the skills. The key thing are the people and the skills that people actually have. And if you think it's what our head of future skills said in the event last week, It typically takes about 10 years in the UK that what is taught in universities is actually trickling down into the colleges, into the vocational training. And I think that hasn't been mentioned maybe enough today. It's not only about training a lot of academics, it is really how can you get skills training, upskilling across the whole of the population. I think that is a key thing, and that is what we experience not only in Germany, but in the UK very much as well. And always the other big question is, when do you start to engage? And engaging at the age of 16 or 18 years is far too late. Almost everybody is basically now saying you have to start to engage and encourage young students at an age of maybe 7, 8, something like that. So that are very important things. And I think when you come to people, there is a big opportunity for Ghana that I see as well, because we live in a change, in a time of massive change. It's not only COVID. COVID's learned us a lot, but if you look at all the things about climate change, about sustainability, about resilience, where COVID learned a lot. We learned a lot from, hopefully. I think particularly the sustainability agenda brings a lot of opportunities for Ghana as well. And what the point is, in the end, if you look, you maybe see some people or maybe some countries in front of you, but if you, with this changing world, if you look again, you maybe see they're not in front of you because they've gone into the wrong direction. And I think that's what I personally would see, that Ghana has this massive big opportunity in this time of change to actually get into the right direction and do a lot in the way of sustainability and use the resources that you have in the country and add the value there instead of shipping a lot of things through the world, which end up as a waste. So create a value where you are is probably a big part of more sustainability in the world.
All right. Thank you so much. So very interesting perspectives, how academia needs to change, what the private sector needs to do to connect, how the government agencies should be maybe doubling down on creating these centers of excellence, making sure that there's inclusivity in the digital transformation agenda. Very interesting comments there, Harald. This idea of focusing on the why, what the outcomes are, the how. I know the Vice President mentioned a tech park. You know, what specific programs are we focused on, and so forth. We don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to go around very quickly for each of you to maybe focus on what's next and how you're going to measure success in your sector. Very, very, very briefly, and then we'll go to the Q&A session. So anybody can start. What's next? How are we going to measure success? This is supposed to be a 10-year program, this conference. So a year from now, what will you be telling us that you achieved? So anybody can start.
All right. So
very briefly.
Okay, good. So I've written 4 things that I would like to share, and the first is what's next. Streamlined digital initiatives, right? As the government, you want to be able to streamline all these initiatives, have a one place for a user or a citizen to access the services and the goods that the government will be providing. Now, I think what we lack, or somewhat what we can do better, is the new and different way approach towards the innovation, right? We mentioned earlier that we have to be more inclusive and use this co-creation way of problem identification and design and development and all that. And after that, we want to be able to make the data that we are collecting in all this innovation and digitalization is all about collecting data. This data that we are collecting, we want to make it harvestable so that in the future we can use it for research purposes and other uses, in a controlled manner guided by the data protection laws. And the 4th thing is training. And we mentioned, Johanna mentioned here, We need training to train the critical mass in the public service where I am, and also the private citizens, so that in the future, as the government is rolling out all these initiatives, everybody will be able, by the training that we've been given, will be able to access and provide these services that the government is putting out. For us, at where I come from, the AITI-KACE, we are doing quite a bit of that, providing digital skills programs. We actually have a center in Bogatanga which is focused on free and open source software, and we have a center in Sunyani which is also doing the IoT and all the other rest. So we are doing our bit to help the government move, and then since we don't have time, I'll leave it here, but of course there will be other opportunities to talk to our booth outside and then get some more information on what the AITI-KACE is doing. But thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yes, Prof.
All right, so I'd like to go next. I think Johanna touched on one, which is how do we engage the informal sector? I think we need to do some more investment on the AI side to make sure that we can dummy down what digitization transformation is to people who are not in the formal sector. And what I mean by that is, if a farmer in Kumasi takes a snapshot of an armyworm, the system should be able to tell him or her in tree what disease it is, where do they get the chemicals from, and what is the methodology of constituting that drug to kill whatever virus it is. So we need to use technology to integrate them into this transformational journey. So that's one. I think we should not shy away from having degrees that specifically describe what we are trying to do. Are we able to offer a degree in entrepreneurship and innovation, entrepreneurship and digitization, so that it's much more targeted to what we want to sustain? I also think that, look, beyond this transformation journey we've initiated, we need to figure out how to leverage digitization in general. We still import spare parts into this country. There are technologies today that will transform any spare parts in this country so that we can produce it locally. So I want us to start looking holistically how we can engage digital transformation to also industrialize. So once we can tell who you are as a citizen, what you do for a living, where you live, whether you are paying your taxes or not, when the police stop you for speeding, we know exactly who you are. Beyond that, we need to be able to produce the medical devices, the medical equipment, and these are all within the purview of digital transformation.
So
Okay.
you see collaborations with the Kofi Annan Institute? Is this something we can hold you accountable for next year?
Sure, we work together on that. That's why we're here, right?
Yes.
And then just a quick note that we have an AI center actually in Sunyani. So and I just saw my director of research and innovation sitting there. I'm sure he was nodding. Oh, my boss forgot to mention the AI center we have. So yeah, we do have an AI center. So we are doing some good things, but we can find out more from our booth outside.
Right.
Sure.
Samuel, what can the private sector draw from all of that?
It's quite interesting. I was listening to the two gentlemen, and we have an innovation center as well called Ghana Innovation Hub, which is funded by the World Bank and the Ministry of Communication. And skills development is like at the top of it, right? So I think the doers of the actors and the doers of digital transformation is key. We need to have a goal, maybe create a target and say, okay, by so and so, we'll have about 100,000 digital champions trained and jobs placed, right? So there's no way of metering how many jobs has been created in the digital ecosystem today, right? So we need a number, I think, to hold ourselves accountable so that by 2030, if you will, we have a number and say, okay, we've achieved that. And these numbers are coming from these segments of the industry, right? So that's number one. The second bit I'm seeing is Ghana is still a heavily import country. We don't manufacture service. We don't manufacture cybersecurity hardware or code, right? So almost 90% of everything we're doing, talking about in digital, is dependent on somebody else, right? So in any world, when you want to build anything and your raw material that you need to use to build is dependent on third party, your speed of execution is hampered. So what I like to say is by 2030, if possible, we should have an ecosystem of the third-party independent software vendors or OEMs that we're working with, we should have an ecosystem for them so that the partnership is more targeted. There has to be a collaborative incentives created. Part of the gains they're making in the country should be redirected towards this growth of employment, hub support, or what have you. And maybe tariffs should be removed away from them in terms of the import process, right? There's a lot of digital waste in Ghana in terms of hardware, printers, phones, you name it. These OEMs are doing business, but nobody's really policing them, right? Nobody's really looking at their activities and saying, hey, we want you to be part of our ecosystem. Let's play ball together properly. The last bit in terms of private sector that we're working on is access to private. So if you look at private sector's budget allocation for technical projects, most of them, if they don't have the budget, they cut things out, right? So what we're doing is trying to find out a creative way to create a fund to support digital transformation projects. We're bringing capital from the outside world, not for venture funding, but more for digital projects, right? And we believe the development organizations can facilitate in co-creating this capital pool that the private sector can use to transform their businesses, which in turn can go into the rural markets, which can help the people in the less privileged parts of the country. So those are the three things that I like to say could help. So in summary, access to skills and having a target. Next is trying to formalize the dependents or parties, OEMs and ISVs that we work with. And then lastly, a new, what we call neo capital that will facilitate the private sector's ambitions in digital transformation.
Thank you so much. And Johanna, listening to all of that, what would you say they should do and not do? If you could put it that way, advice.
Let me rephrase the question.
Okay, advice. What advice do you have for this gentleman?
Let me rephrase
sorry
the
to
question.
say, if we can have we're going to have a short Q&A session, so if you could start lining up by the mic, it would be great.
Okay. So very briefly about kind of how to measure success, I also wrote down a number of things that have also been mentioned about kind of, I would add the number of Ghanaian innovations scaled to Africa and beyond that we can measure. I think the number of people online, the number of jobs, digital jobs created, or people in the informal sector who have increased their income through digital means are some of the examples. And I believe GDIW will bring at the end of the week the answer to what's next. And what to rephrase the question, I can say what we can kind of support, what we can bring to the table, and that is the facilitation of stakeholder coordination and to provide a platform for this at a national and Pan-African level. So at a Pan-African level with Smart Africa Alliance, many different African countries working here on topics like payment, digital payments and artificial intelligence. And so facilitating this. Another example, also kind of to show what is going on here. We have partners from Rwanda here, and tomorrow there is an exchange between the ICT Chamber of Rwanda and the Chamber of Technology of Ghana. So that's another example of how we facilitate stakeholder coordination. The second thing we can bring to the table is also to support in capacity building for intermediaries. Like, for example, a whole lot of work we do with innovation hubs in the country, also in not beyond Accra, to support in strengthening organizational structures and technical skills, and then strengthening local innovation, digital innovation. And I'm happy to further discuss with Sam about this fund. Although we are also, I must say, providing technical cooperation and don't come so much with funding, but we can kind of facilitate that. And we have also in 2019 kind of brought investors in to meet and match with Ghanaian startups. So that's also some of the examples what we can bring to the table. And I think talking about how to measure success, I think I'll briefly also speak about the ecosystem assessment, or hand over to Gordon to do that himself, because I think that's...
I'll mention that in the closing comments.
Perfect.
Thank
Then
you so much.
I'll not do that.
Right, okay. All right, so we have one question. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Mardia from Zongovation Hub. A straightforward question. We are talking about digital transformation agenda, and my question is, where is the starting point? Where should the government start? Because do I have to finish primary, go to junior high school and SHS before I go and then say I'm going to do data science or maybe artificial intelligence? Should there be a starting point at that formative age? Thank
So
you.
a starting point for citizens, you mean, to engage in the agenda?
From government,
Fro-
actually.
From government, okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's take the second question.
Hello, everyone.
So I think we only take 3 questions and then, yeah. So go ahead, sir.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kanessa from the Digital Transformation Center, Kigali. And my question mostly goes out to private sector and education sector, yeah? So it's the way I look at it is there's demand and then there's supply. So is there a way for education sector to evolve into a design that is basically based on an industrial initiative where, for example, at the university level, you teach students to start looking at what has been done already elsewhere, as opposed to the old way of you need to learn this and then maybe figure out how you're going to use it for innovation, because they say innovation, but is there a way for the private sector to create basically an industrial initiative? Okay, I give a live example.
I think it's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm giving a live example. So private sector has several industries in different categories that are innovating, right? Like the banking sector, fintech, for example. Then you create an industrial initiative and you say, all students that are going to school in university right now, learning about fintech, should maybe join us for practicums and try out their models from an actual industry, right? And so the education sector starts to learn from there with basically a system that works in the actual environment where we live, not like the theoretical way. For example, mobile money is very successful in Africa because when it was tried elsewhere, they had Visa cards and other stuff, and they didn't think it would work. But then the industrial initiative of saying, let's try this out there in the village, see if this works, made it work. So is there a way for education sector to plug into the private sector and start having what we call the practicums or the communities of practice, where students, by the time they leave university, they have actually tried out most of their innovation ideas in a real environment, not theoretically.
Okay, thank you so much.
get that.
Last question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kofi Asarabrakun, CEO, Mansa Musa Foundation. Please, I would like to entreat all of the panelists about the informal sector. Please, it's really important because in Ghana, almost half of the population does not have access to internet. So I would love to see coming down to the people down there because they are the chunk of the population. So if you can get them on board, indeed, we'll make a progress. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much.
So at my university, we made it mandatory for every student coming on that campus to take a course on Python. We think we should actually start teaching kids at very early stages to program. Programming is no longer a course from my perspective. I think it's a tool. So we need to start arming our kids at a very, very early stage, how to start using some of these systems that are inevitably going to become part of our lives. We have actually introduced artificial intelligence. I think the first university to introduce a bachelor's degree in artificial intelligence in Ghana. And if we're following up on that, we expect all our students to undertake 4 internships before they graduate. So what we are going to need now in this ecosystem, this newly evolving ecosystem, is how do we make our students to industries where they can actually learn, as you said. Now, there has always been a conversation, an ongoing conversation, about a supposed chasm between industry and academia. And my contention has always been that there is actually no industry, because if there were, there won't be a chasm. In places where academia has been so useful to industrial transformation, it is actually the industries that chase academia for new ideas, new insights. When I worked for Siemens, some of our fundamental innovations came from University of Erlangen. So if there are functioning industries that are out there to make money, to generate revenue, to be at the forefront of technology, there will not be a chasm because they will know academia will be their strategic partners. So in short, I think we should all make an effort. I mean, I know GIZ is working with IIPGH, which is the board that I chair, the ICT group in Ghana, and kids are learning coding. My kids are online every weekend taking courses. I think this has to become another way of doing business. Now, on the IT side, I really don't know what to say to that, because
I can take that. But I think generally, right, speaking, Doc and Prof, is that there's a lack of confidence in the educational system, right? And it's predominantly because the educational system has not measured what the output is. I think somebody was talking about demand and supply. If I'm looking for 100 data science students, the question is, which university do I go to? If I'm looking for developers today, which educational institution should I go to, right? So the demand side is high in the private sector, but the supply side is very ambiguous. There's no clear-cut churning out of talent, right? And I think the lady who asked the first question was saying, where do we start? If the input devices, the learning methods and the devices we're using is still pen and paper, I think thanks to BIG, who has been making pens here for I don't know how many years, they've done a great job. I mean, to me, that's the biggest technology innovation in Ghana, right? A pen. Because you cannot, if you weigh the input devices we have in Ghana between pens and keyboards or mobile devices, pen is still rating about 90% in the ecosystem. So kids cannot learn if they can't share information as much, right? So access to tablets, access to input devices that are digital in nature would make the kids familiar with the innovation that we're trying to get them to be comfortable with and create future jobs. So I think that's where it starts. That has to be democratized. There's a huge digital divide in that level, at the high school level. Obviously Digital City is doing well, but the question is, what's the percentage of children or kids who have access to that type of education, right? So I think the digital divide is still a big issue. And the last bit, which has to do with connectivity, internet access, we're huge fans of connectivity. We believe that policy has to move in that area. And I think the OEMs, the ISVs who are doing business in Ghana, a portion of their revenues could be directed in rural internet connectivity. And that's why we have to reorganize who we're importing from. I mean, the telcos are making money, right? Ericsson, Huawei, all these big vendors are making a lot of money in the country, but the output of where their dividends are going to is not being tracked in terms of their impact, social impact. So there's a huge work because government doesn't have all the capital to do that work. So I think that's, and lastly, before I finish, there's a connectivity issue between private sector and the educational network in terms of the talent to supply demand. So we're working on Africa Digital Talent Network, which is almost like your Uber equivalent to talent, connecting to all the hubs and all the educational networks and the private sector. So when they're looking for talent, we can basically be the broker to support that from our innovation hub.
Right. I'm getting a lot of indicators for us to close the panel. Last words?
A very small bit on the informal sector, on the last question. So yeah, the informal sector in Ghana is huge, and there are ideas and plans on how to solve this challenge, to bring digital and entrepreneurial skills to, is it market women, artisans, by kind of simple bookkeeping, selling products online, mobile payments and insurances. So yeah, there is a program in the pipeline on that.
All right. So just very briefly, a few keywords that I heard: skills, right? A lot of training, a lot of orientation. Let's set targets and make sure that we have measures and indicators that will track our activities and so forth. Let's formalize some of these systems, have a framework, a blueprint. and let's be creative about channeling capital to support these projects and initiatives, and we should do all of this while leaving no one behind. Good summary? All right. And the bit that you wanted me to add on, we have a survey going on trying to capture the health of the innovation ecosystem using what we call the rainforest canvas, rainforest scorecard. So if you find this in your inbox, please fill it out for us and come to our sessions to learn more. Help me in thanking Professor McBagonluri, President and Provost of Academic City University College, Mr. Yeboah Afari, the Director General of Kofi Annan ICT Center, Samuel Amanor, CEO and founder of BLUESPACE, Ms. Johanna Hartung, Component Manager of Digital Transformation Center, GIZ, and of course, Mr. Harald Egner, the Chief Engineer of MTC UK. Thank you so much, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.